Foreward melody photo mug shot shortly after Dad's 90th birthday. I noticed that he had a little extra energy in his voice. He explained that he was starting another project, revising the autobiography for publication in Arabic. Again, Dad was not taking the occasion of a milestone birthday as justification to take life easy, but rather, he was energized by another opportunity for ministry. My sister and I both agreed that this was a project worthy of our support. We are grateful for the front seats we have occupied as we have watched our parents serve God, regardless of where God took them. I remember with great fondness our years in Lebanon. I was born on a balcony, converted to delivery room, on Sha'ara Azmi in Tripoli. I grew up roaming the Hikalia with my sister, coming home with brown feet at the end of the day, the only part of me that was ever anything other than fair. I was shy in those days, but I did rather enjoy helping the doctors and nurses at Hakel Hospital. The best part was going into a ward as a 1,213-year-old, announcing, "The doctor is coming, please leave," and watching all these adults dutifully comply. Being blonde had its benefits. Summer meant Beit Mindera, cool mountain air, watching the Igtata roll in, jumping rope in the evenings with our friends in the village, hunting for snowbar cones and cracking them open to eat the raw snowbar. I loved Tripoli, and we spoke with 7 cast your bread a Tripoli accent. I recall people in Beirut telling me to say the number 1. I knew precisely what they wanted but rather enjoyed giving them one the Tripoli way, and reminding them, "I'm from Tripoli." I taught my first Sunday school lesson at 9 years old, in Arabic. Lebanese culture was very much a part of our lives. Mom and Dad embraced this culture and did not disparage the Lebanese people or their customs to us girls. Trips to the United States were times of culture shock. I can remember opening my lunch at school and finding Mom had made Zeder sandwiches on American slice bread. I was so excited, anticipating the tangy taste, but American kids quickly commented, "What is that you are eating? Looks like you are eating dirt." When visiting people, I had to learn to be rude or else I got no chocolates, drinks, or treats. Americans offer once, and the item is gone. I well remember the grief at leaving Lebanon, the overwhelming grief as we boarded the first plane on our trip to Australia in 1976. Humanly speaking, that was one little step of many on some seemingly insignificant day. But to me it was more than that. It carried a weight of finality. We were not returning to Lebanon as we had planned and hoped. Dad and Mom's ministry with Arabic people was not over. In fact, it was about to soar because they were willing to go wherever God led. After 3 years' absence due to COVID restrictions, God has allowed me to return to Sydney to help my parents. I have spent this first week editing, first of all, because this is a story worth telling. God uses ordinary people to accomplish His extraordinary purposes. My ancestors were common people who worked the land, but they had a heart for God. A heart for God was planted in my parents, took root, and bore much fruit. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. PS 51:17. Second, publishing this story in Arabic is completing the circle. My parents' ministry has been to Arabic-speaking people, and now God's work through them will be available in Arabic. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat, the flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk 3:17-18. 8 Forward photos of girls in Tripoli. Photo of girls in front of TGS entrance, 2011. 9 Cast your bread. While their journey has included difficult times, God is always at work, and today I rejoice in seeing the fruit of Dad and Mom's labor among Arabic people. Truly, God's mercies are new every morning, great is thy faithfulness. Lamentations 3:23. Melody Hester Bruffy, July 2022. 10 Forward. Lebanon, the country of my birth and my childhood. A childhood full of happy memories. Riding our bikes all day long with the neighbor kids, until Mom would call out dinner time, from the kitchen door. Running through the olive groves, picking sour grapes and humeda and sucking on the sour stems. Playing house with my sister in the tree house handmade by our dad, perched snugly in an olive tree in our backyard. Helping Dad run the electrical wiring for the camp in the beautiful mountains above Shirlene. Photo mug shot Tripoli. Swinging higher and higher in the crisp mountain air, calling out to my willing volunteer pushing me on the swing, until my little feet would touch the branches of a pine tree above. Sitting in the janirik tree in our yard, picking and eating as many sour janirik as my tummy could hold. Walking through the streets of Tripoli as a blonde, blue-eyed little girl, knowing that I stuck out like anything. Going to school and knowing I wouldn't get in trouble, because I was fair and blonde. How did I find myself in 1960s and 1970s Tripoli, Lebanon? My parents were most unusual farm kids from Midwest USA who had a heart for God and for the people of Lebanon. So much so that they left family and friends to go to a strange country, which I would call home. For me, learning Arabic was easy. Not so for my parents. For me, Lebanese food was and still is the most divine food ever. I crave kib bilaban, and can't resist the smell of a Lebanese bakery pumping out manish. I married a Lebanese man from Zail. Living now in Australia, Lebanese culture is a big part of my life. My parents loved the generosity and hospitality of the Lebanese people, and this is part of who I am. Looking back at my parents' life and ministry now, I am overwhelmed with their love and commitment to a people not their own by birth, but their own by choice. Their bond with the people of Lebanon and the Middle East for that fact is so strong that they chose to live the rest of their lives amongst them. 11 Cast your bread. I am humbled to have had the opportunity to witness firsthand their labor of love, and to see the fruit that God gives when we cast our lives as seed for a cause far greater than ourselves. You will be blessed as you read their most remarkable life story. Shirlene Hester Name, Shushu, July 2022. 12 Introduction. I have never been excited about writing the story of our lives. Perhaps I felt that our experiences were not that significant. Further, I'm not that personality that wants to be the prominent one in the room proudly announcing my greater than your or holier than thou exploits. So when it came to writing an autobiography, I had my excuses lined up to say, no, thank you. However, the Lord showed me that I was wrong. He brought to my mind how many biographies are in the Bible, unlike other religious holy books. God chose to teach us so much through the context of the imperfect lives of His unworthy people. In the New Testament, Jesus taught us many truths through parables where He created, as it were, an imaginary person with a life story that taught certain truths. So I packed up my excuses and started writing the story of these children of the land. Many mundane details will be mentioned, almost like a running but sometimes disjointed diary. Some of the details will be of interest to the reader, and some will not. Pastors may relate to certain perspectives and lay people to other. I have no delusions. I do not consider myself the showcase servant of the Lord whom everyone should mimic. Keep in mind that my life has been, in many ways, quite ordinary and mundanely usual. However, from 40 years of age and on, things changed sharply at times to the unordinary and unusual, if not dramatic. But in it all, the Lord was our protector and teacher, and it is that fact that I trust will not be lost on the reader. Last, I must express my sincere thanks and gratitude to my wife Kathleen for her work proofreading the 2012 English edition of this book. For the 2022 revision, I am indebted to our wonderful daughters, both born in Lebanon. 13 Cast Your Bread Melody took on the editing of the 2022 revision. Shirlene acts as my chief of operations, which included all the Arabic phone calls to Lebanon involving matters pertaining to all of the books of Adalil al-Musa'idi along with Cast Your Bread. A big thank you to 2 loving daughters who are always there for us during this challenging phase of our lives. We dedicate this book to our sincere hope that readers may find hidden in these pages some truths that will catch their interest, warm their hearts and motivate them to find encouragement from the 70-year ministry of these unworthy servants. Through it all, the fears and faithfulness in El Dorado, Kansas, the aspirations and inexplicable anguish in Lebanon and the trials and triumphs in Sydney, we have discovered God's unchanging faithfulness to undergird and sustain us in every instance. Hopefully, everyone who reads this book will pick up threads of practical truths which the Holy Spirit will weave into a strong cord that blesses them. If our small trials and their lessons can inspire and encourage others to greater trust in the faithful Creator and Savior who does all things well, we will rejoice and be abundantly rewarded. H. Richard Hester, July 2022. 14 Chapter 1 At home with wonderful mom and dad. Early life. I was born on a bitter cold stormy day, January 11, 1932, in the home of a rancher farmer on the plains of western Oklahoma. I was the second of 4 children, 3 boys, D, 4 years older, Dale, 8 years younger, and 1 girl, Sandra, 6 years younger. My father rode a horse through the snowstorm to reach a neighbor's house, 1.6 kilometers away, to use a telephone. The doctor was summoned to come and assist with the birth. Because of the deep snow, the Hester home with irrigation well 15 Cast Your Bread. The doctor had to trudge through the snow, carrying his black case the last 1/2 kilometer. By the time the doctor arrived, the 9.5 pound baby boy had already made his appearance. As a baby I was quite active and could literally run at 9 months. However, my parents were quite concerned because of my inability to talk plainly for the first 5 years. I just jabbered, and few could understand what I was saying. Quite a problem for a boy who was destined to spend most of his life speaking and preaching the gospel. It must have been, however, a divinely given holiday, for my parents and maybe even for me. There was much work on the ranch, and I learned at 5 years of age to feed the cattle, milk the cows and do the other chores common to country life. My mother fell sick for a time, and my father told me I must learn to do all the tasks in the home before I would be big enough to do everything outside with him. So I somehow managed to keep food on the table, wash, iron, and clean house, through the detailed instructions and urgings of my sick mother. I loved to see my grandfather Hester, who lived less than a mile away. My grandfather dug a well on his farm by hand in 1902. The main attraction at my grandfather's house was a metal cookie can that he would pull out of the Grandpa Hester dug this well by hand in 1902 16 introduction cupboard and then offer me some ginger snaps. I still love the taste of ginger snaps. Later, after my grandmother died, one big room of the house was moved near to my parents' house. Daily I would take things to my grandfather and listen to stories about his experiences on the Great Mississippi River, including its frightening floods when he was a boy. Tornadoes were common occurrences in the Oklahoma springtime. I remember my father waking us up in the middle of the night to go to an underground cellar for protection from a feared tornado. One day when my father was gone to Laverne, a bad storm set in. My little sister was standing at the front window of our home watching the threatening storm. Suddenly she screamed as she saw the large garage/shop building in front of the house being lifted up about 15 meters into the air, where it hovered momentarily like a helicopter. Then, it moved slowly across the sky to a nearby field where it crumpled into twisted metal sheets and small pieces like kindling wood. Later, after the storm had passed, my father returned. When he came over the small hill, he gasped in shock. The garage/shop building was missing, though the truck in it was still standing intact but all alone. Except for that incident, our ranch Richard operated this tractor and combine was spared any further tornado damage. At 7 years of age, I began driving a tractor in the fields, plowing, planting, mowing and doing all the things that people of the land do. At the age of 11 my father fell sick during the autumn maize harvest, and I was called upon to meet the challenge. I finished the maize harvest after the first snow, driving the tractor, operating the combine and then trucking the maize to a large granary. Neighbors were amazed, but it seemed ordinary to me. Responsibility and hard work at a young age gave me a firm foundation for life and later service for Christ, when hardships would make it so easy to quit. 17 Cast your bread. I wanted a bicycle, but I only had $5 in savings. I bought a dilapidated bike with the $5 and completely rebuilt it under my father's supervision. I was learning to live within my budget and make do with what I had. My father taught me the value of money by different methods. For example, when I was 5 years old, he took me to meet the bank president to ask for a $50 loan to buy a calf to raise and feed out. The banker agreed to extend the loan and asked me to sign the loan papers. As a matter of precaution, my father was asked to sign as well. After feeding the calf for a year and showing the fatted calf in a county livestock show, I sold Richard's first bicycle, the calf, paid off the bank loan and tithed on the profit after deducting the expense of the cattle feed. Prior to the calf project, my father led me to raise some chickens and tithe on the profit when I sold them. Later, I would work in my father's fields in return for the use of a 20-acre field that would be mine to work, profit from and tithe on the increase to the Lord. When the wheat was ready to harvest, a storm was looming, and I worked past midnight harvesting my 20 acres for fear of losing the wheat crop. The ranch had many kilometers of fences to repair or rebuild. I would use this knowledge to build a strong barbed wire fence around the camp property in Lebanon many years later. Windmills had to be repaired, and I would climb up on the tower platform and assist my father in repairing a windmill to pump water for cattle them. Hauling hay and stacking it in the barn, grinding grain for the cattle feed and shocking the maize bundles, standing them upright in an A form, in the fields were all part of my young life. 18 Introduction. Once I was working with adult men on a threshing crew in a field full of shocks of maize, milo, bundles standing like Indian teepees. The men questioned my dad as to whether his skinny boy could keep up with them, but they soon found out that my skinniness was deceiving. Responsibility and hard work, which were the norm, built confidence and character in my life. What a legacy my wise parents bequeathed me as a young man, giving me rich resources to face the challenges, bumps and storms of life. My parents never heard of a marriage or family seminar. They never read a book on the subject, but they believed the Bible and tried to practice it. We children never felt our parents were one thing at church and something else at home. I was born in the middle of the Great Depression when economic conditions were tragically difficult worldwide. The New York stock market crashed on Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929. The prices for farm products plummeted to a fraction of their previous prices, while loans and debts remained locked in at their original higher prices. My father had financed the purchase of his property with a bank loan, approximately 2 years before the crash, so he was very vulnerable at that point because of his big debt. Many farmers and ranchers went broke and had to leave their properties and hopes. However, my father refused to give up and stubbornly held on to ride out the storm by the grace of the God in whom he trusted. I will never forget my father's hardships and how he continued to tithe through hard times. My mother's faith, courage, sacrifice and support were unwavering. The joyous family celebration, when the mortgage note was publicly burned and thanks given to God, could never be erased from the heart and my impressionable heart and mind that was taking it all in. My eyes were seeing in reality the faithfulness of God to those who honor Him. World War II made an indelible impression on my young life and taught me some basics about commitment and sacrifice. I was 9 years old, sitting at the breakfast table on December 8, 1941, when I heard the radio announcement by our United States President F.D. Roosevelt, "Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." That was followed that night by attacks on Malaya, Hong Kong, Guam, Philippines, and other strategic islands. President Roosevelt continued, "With confidence in 19 cast your bread our armed forces and with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God." About 2,500 military men were killed in the Pearl Harbor attack, and the U.S. naval fleet was severely crippled. 4 of our 8 battleships were sunk. I nearly froze. I felt a flush as tremors of fear raced through my mind and body. Our world was sliding into a frightful world war. My boyish heart was afraid. Thousands of volunteers flooded into the armed forces. Car factories were turned into factories producing war equipment and weapons. Car tires, gasoline, and many food items were rationed and had to be used sparingly. I remember my mother dividing up the month's rations of sugar. Each of us children received our month's sugar to use with our breakfast cereals in a very small brown paper bag that we guarded with our lives. It had to last a full month. We all wanted to support our troops, and no sacrifice was too much. All efforts and goods went towards the war effort. The world was at war, our liberty was at stake. 100 million soldiers and military personnel from many countries were involved in this truly world war. When it was all over, we would learn that up to 78 million people died in this war. We were proud to live in a free country. We were not ashamed of our freedom. We were ready to sacrifice all to preserve that freedom. Thousands of our soldiers never returned home. They paid the ultimate sacrifice of death for something they really believed in. Other thousands returned home with broken, Richard on top right with family deformed bodies and missing limbs. They were ready to suffer the remainder of their lives. They were proud of their free country and wanted to maintain that freedom. I shared in that deep spirit of commitment and sacrifice in my boyish way. This would later translate into my way of life, a life with convictions and commitment that would not shun sacrifice for the ultimate victory, God's victory. I read every newspaper in an effort to follow the events of the war. I sat by the fireplace 20 introduction reading the newspaper and found it hard to leave it when Dad told me to go out into the snow and bring in logs for the fire. And when victory came, I felt a flush through my body and mind at the joy of victory and peace. Education. Richard's country schoolhouse. For the first 8 years of education. The first 8 years of my education took place in a one-room country schoolhouse, District 27, with the coal-burning pot-belly stove centrally located to counter the winter's bitter cold. Each of the 20 to 30 students from the 8th grades would recite some of their lesson to the one teacher. The modern educational strategies were unknown. Reading was taught phonetically and mathematics had its tables to master. Reading became very important for me at an early age. At the age of 6, my mother conducted a contest for me and my 10-year-old brother. We were to memorize the books of the Bible, the presidents of the United States, and the 48 states and capitals of the USA. One minor mix-up with Bismarck, North Dakota, cost me the contest and the loss of the prize, a shiny flashlight. I wept with working on Richard's old 1946 Chevy, a broken heart. 21 Cast your bread. My father faithfully taught me how to work. I learned some basics of carpentry by helping my father build 2 houses and a large arc-shaped barn. I learned something of basic mechanics, repairing motors and machines. When I had to harvest the maize hauling hay from the field's crop at the age of 11, the weather was bitter cold, and the combine motor would not start. I dismantled the carburetor of the motor, fixed the problem, reassembled the motor and cranked it manually, for it had no electric starter, and to my delight, it started. My father taught me patiently and never made me feel that I was stupid or incapable of doing something. Richard's mother loved her garden and flowers. I was young when I worked with my mother for a season, doing household tasks. In summer I worked with her hoeing the garden that contained beans, peas, carrots, radishes, lettuce, onions, cucumbers, watermelons, rock melons, Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, strawberries, tomatoes, and others. Then I assisted my mother in canning the different foods in glass jars. For the most part we lived off the land. Mom served us good wholesome meals, and nothing was thrown away. Leftovers would make another appearance until they had been eaten. To this day, at 90 years of age, I cannot bear to throw out food that is not spoiled. My dear father dutifully consumed all the leftovers. Today, many people do not eat leftovers, they throw them out. I cannot but think of many who have little food to eat. I often churned butter from the cream off the milk. Milking the cows was a daily job. No work was off limits, everything was to be learned and shared. 22 Introduction. Working together created a close, trusting relationship between me and my parents. It was just natural to share any problem with them. They had shared their lives with me. They instilled in me a disgust of those habits that would destroy and demean my life. I was never tempted to smoke or to drink any kind of alcohol. I believed such were foolish and harmful habits to be avoided. I received a $25 reward, a big amount in those days, from my grandfather for not smoking before the age of 21. My grandfather figured that abstinence would be a habit after 21. My parents believed in corporal punishment for untruthfulness and disobedience. It was not administered in anger but with a full understanding on the part of us children that we deserved it. Today I can count on one hand the spankings received from my father for misdemeanors. These gaps were more the result of lack of attention given to the command or careless forgetfulness more than deliberate disobedience. I basically wanted to do right and to please my parents. Apparently the punishments made a profound impression on both my backside and memory, thus accomplishing the intended result. Perhaps an exception to the rule was an incident in a high school science class. While the teacher was talking to someone at the front of the class bully sprawled on his stomach across a desk. A nearby yardstick and the bully's bottom constituted a temptation too great for me to resist. I whacked the bully with the yardstick. The blow created an acoustic boom which attracted the immediate attention of the stern lady teacher. I was spared any punishment, but I didn't repeat such an indulgence. It was not my normal behavior of a sensitive, caring attitude towards people. I respected and appreciated my parents even more after leaving home. I wrote my mother and Kathleen's mother every Monday for the first 10 years of our Lebanon experience. I felt we owed it to our parents to keep them a part of our lives. Unfortunately, I backslid from this habit during the 6 months of building the camp facility in Beit Mendera. Picking up workers from Sahit El Khora in Tripoli at 5 a.m., driving into the mountains to the camp and arriving home between 8 o'clock and 9 p.m. at night left little room for writing. One Mother's Day I wrote my mother as follows: "Dearest Mom, please read what Mother earns in 30 years. She never earned any money, she lives on a farm. She is somebody's mother and maybe your own 23 cast your bread she has earned nothing. No, but during her 30 years of working she has served 432,983 meals, she has made 3,123 garments, 32,000 loaves of bread, 5,390 cakes, 7,932 pies, 1,500 gallons of lard. She has grown 1,432 bushels of vegetables and has raised 7,660 chickens, churned 5,430 pounds of butter, put up 3,625 jars of preserves, scrubbed 177,725 articles of laundry. And she has put in 35,839 hours of sweeping and washing and scrubbing. At accepted prices for this work, it is worth $115,485.50. Mom, this was part of an article which was printed in an old newspaper we received. It's a good introduction to what I want to say. I know that I now appreciate you as a wonderful more than ever before. I feel so fortunate and blessed to have been brought up in a Christian home and taught the things that are right. I appreciate your bushels of patience and help throughout the years. I know that all the things that you have done for me have had a great influence on where I am today, serving the Lord. I don't know why the Lord gave me a home and a mother like you, but He did, and I feel a greater responsibility because of it. Mother's Day is not the only day I appreciate you, but it does offer a special opportunity to express a bit of my feelings. Kathleen sends her special regards also on this day. Laverne High School. Richard in top left with big horn. Laverne Band 24 Introduction. I had to rise early to feed the cattle and to do some other chores before walking the 1/2 kilometer to catch the school bus for the hour-long ride to the high school in the small Oklahoma town of Laverne. I participated in the sports of basketball and football, but there was little time for practice with all the work on the farm and ranch that had to be kept current. I wanted to play the trombone in the high school band, but because I was tall, the band director insisted I must play the sousaphone, which had little value for future use. I avoided the wrong kind of friends and never participated in the vices of the worldly young people in high school. One of these young people commented 56 years later that I was known for always doing the right thing. One little flap on an algebra quiz, the principal taught algebra, cost me the valedictorian award of my class. As a result, a girl and I tied for salutatorian, with both of us giving speeches at the high school graduation ceremony. 1948 to 1949. Richard Football. Laverne 25 Cast your bread. I loved airplanes. During my high school years, my father had a small plane, and I loved flying with him. Once, my father and I went to a Royal Livestock Show in Kansas City, Missouri, in the small plane. It was an exciting event. Bad weather hindered the flight home, and some anxious moments brought fear when dense fog enveloped the plane for a short period. Finally, the plane entered an opening in the threatening clouds, and a small airport was immediately underneath. What a welcome sight, and what a good pilot my father was. Richard and brother Dale with Dad by Airplane 26.